Welcome to the very first edition of Digital Dialogues, a biannual webinar series crafted for individuals enthusiastic about cyber strategy. In each succinct 30-minute episode, we will deliver impactful presentations, providing you valuable insights and knowledge to navigate the intricate realm of cyber strategy. Designed for intellectual engagement and community building, this series serves as a union between experts, students, and aficionados alike, where they can converge to share, learn, and foster a deeper appreciation of the digital landscape. I'm Dr. Mark Gregorjevsky, professor of cybersecurity at Embry-Riddle University, and I will be guiding you through this fascinating journey of discovery in the evolving field of cyber strategy. Let me welcome our first guest, Dr. Michael Fischer-Keller. Dr. Fischer-Keller has devoted over 2 decades as a research staff member within the Information Technology and Systems Division at the Institute for Defense Analysis, or IDA. In this role, he has been instrumental in providing consistent support to various high-profile defense entities, including the Office of the Secretary of Defense, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, as well as combatant and multinational force commanders. His work in cyber strategy is reflective of IDA's commitment to supporting these pivotal defense departments and commands, signifying the importance and relevance of his contributions to both practitioners and strategists alike. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you. Good afternoon. And I thank you on behalf of my co-authors, Richard and Emily, as well.
Thank you. So for those who have not yet read your book, Cyber Persistence Theory, can you please summarize the main arguments and the logic undergirding it?
Well, we're starting with the most difficult question, but it's a good way to start. I'll try to do it succinctly in this way. We recognize that policymakers are now operating in a very complicated international strategic environment. In fact, we say that they are having to deal with simultaneously 3 distinct security environments. Each of those security environments comprises a technology or a composite of technologies that imposes distinct conditions on national leaders. And each of those distinct sets of conditions imposes distinct security logics on those national security leaders. So policymakers now have to address all 3 of those things simultaneously. It's very complicated. Now, to get away from the political science talk and try to put meat on the bone of what I just put before you, I'm going to give you brief descriptions of the 3 different strategic environments. And again, they're primarily based on technologies that are central to security challenges. So the first one is nuclear weapons. That is the technology. The condition that we argue the technology imposes on states is one of offense dominance. And if you think about nuclear weapons, that is the takeaway, right? You cannot defeat them. There's no defense against them. And so when we talk about offense advantage, offense or defense advantage, these are actually offense dominant. They always win, right? So that is the condition. That suggests strongly a particular security logic, right? You're not going to defend, so your logic can't be defend because you can't defend against nuclear weapons. You're not going to go to war against them because you'll lose again because nuclear weapons are offense dominant. And so that leaves you with the third option of deterrence. And that's why deterrence is the security logic that's affiliated with nuclear weapons. So that's strategic environment number 1. Strategic environment number 2 is an environment that comprises what we generally understand as conventional weapon systems. So these are your air forces, your naval forces, your ground forces, space forces, so on and so forth. These actually create a different condition for policymakers, and it is a condition of either offense or defense advantage. Again, not dominance, that's nuclear weapons, but with conventional weapons, depending on the technologies of the day, the technologies can suggest that an offensive strategy would be more effective for security, or a defensive strategy will be more effective for security. That's what we mean by offense or defense advantage. So the security logic, based on the prevailing condition, which could be either offense or defense advantage, depending on the timeline of technology you're looking at, is either an offensive strategy, a defensive strategy, or again, deterrence, which can be used to oppose an offensive advantaged state. So that's security environment number 2. Security environment 3, which was the whole idea of writing the book, is the cyber strategic environment. And that comprises all the technologies that cyberspace is composed of. And we know about the physical and the logical and the human persona layers. Here's one of those technologies right here that everybody carries around with them. We're talking through one of those technologies. These technologies actually create a third unique set of conditions that policymakers have to deal with. And that is one of offense-defense fluidity and constant contact. Now, offense-defense fluidity, notice that it's different than offense-defense advantage, which was the conventional environment, and offense dominance, which was nuclear. So different condition. Constant contact is a new condition that doesn't apply to either the nuclear or the conventional environments. And that's really a consequence, I think, that everybody understands of the interconnectedness of cyberspace. In every definition of cyberspace, you'll see this term interconnectedness, and that's a consequence of it. We're in constant contact. Your national sources of power, I can reach out and touch. You can reach out and touch my national sources of power. These conditions create a new security logic that is distinct from the nuclear and conventionals, and that is the security logic of initiative persistence. And so we spend the rest of the book, what I just described to you is in essence chapter 2, we spend the rest of the book describing what are the implications of initiative persistence as a security logic. What does it look like in terms of state behavior in and through cyberspace? What does it look like in terms of the interactions between states and non-state actors in cyberspace? What does it mean for stability, and so on and so forth?
Very good. So I want to pick up on one of the things that you put out there. You spoke about nuclear weapons and deterrence, and you also spoke a bit about the offense-defense breakdown. How does that fall apart, and how do you build something new out of that? You don't speak to offense-defense in the book as much. You speak to constant contact. How are people supposed to understand that difference between offense and defense and what you're proposing?
So here's the way you think about it. So I have a new piece coming out on offense defense advantage and offense defense fluidity. So the latter is the condition in cyberspace, it's fluidity, and the former is the condition in the conventional strategic space. So if you look at technology in the conventional space, you tend to see changes over decades, right? There are long periods of time. For those who've written about the offense-defense balance and have measured it from an assessment of technological balances, you literally see 40, 50 years, sometimes 100 years, if you go back into the 1600s when they looked at wars. It's relatively stable. So offense advantage, stable for a long period, defense advantage, stable for a long period. Well, in cyberspace, it's very different. We say that the condition is offense-defense fluidity because it's highly unstable, that neither the offense nor the defense can have advantage except for a fleeting moment. And if you think about the core characteristics of cyberspace, this actually makes sense, right? We describe cyberspace as macro resilient and micro vulnerable, right? So micro vulnerable means there are vulnerabilities everywhere. And you read about it every day in the news, right? There's something new that's been exploited. That's a vulnerability. The cyberspace and the internet, when it was designed, was not designed to be secure. It was originally designed to be an open internet where researchers who, of course, you and I, we have no hostile intentions, right? So there's no concern about security. Well, eventually, once it expanded and less, I should say, more malicious actors got into the play, then they started to take advantage of those vulnerabilities. But the other thing about cyberspace is you can mitigate those vulnerabilities, right? You can push a patch, you can change your configuration, you can unplug, you can upgrade through a new system. So that's the macro resilience of it, right? So it's micro vulnerable, macro resilience. And this back and forth between offenders and defenders in cyberspace occurs milliseconds all the time, every day, throughout the day, week, so on and so forth. So that's why we call the condition offense defense fluidity. And that has significant implications for what your strategy needs to be.
Thank you. So as you know, the 2023 DoD cyber strategy was just released a few weeks ago. Is cyber persistence theory a good fit within the current strategy, with cyber as just one of the domains contributing to integrated deterrence? Or does it need to be understood on its own?
Yeah, it's a great question, Mark. So the DoD cyber strategy, because it falls under the National Defense Strategy, has to be integrated strategically with it, right? Even though the DoD cyber strategy is primarily about cyber capabilities and activities. So when they wrote the DoD cyber strategy, they wrote it in with a goal of embedding it into the larger National Defense Strategy of integrated deterrence. If you look at the DoD cyber strategy by itself, you'll see persistent engagement all over it. Right? They constantly talk about campaigning, exploiting vulnerabilities, being anticipatory. These are all the things that are that we describe as part of cyber persistence theory. But that doesn't mean it's disconnected from integrated deterrence, right? All the campaigning that you can do in and through cyberspace, consistent with cyber persistence theory, can also facilitate security in terms of integrated deterrence. We've written a couple of pieces on this. So you can, for example, by campaigning in competition, day-to-day competition, you can undermine the confidence that your adversaries have in their capabilities. Right? That contributes to deterrence. If they don't think they have the capability to fight, then they're not going to be willing to fight. But you can do that through cyber campaigning. You can do it through other ways too, but what I'm trying to offer is an example of how campaigning and persistent engagement and cyber persistence theory is not disconnected from, and doesn't need to be disconnected from, integrated deterrence. It very easily fits into it. Now, all of that said, my opening discussion of 3 strategic environments suggests that you still need to think about cyberspace differently from a security logic perspective. And that holds, right? That holds. But the way that the 2023 strategy, cyber strategy is written, they've actually incorporated that nicely into that so that it feeds right up into integrated deterrence. And if you think about integrated deterrence, Mark, that integrated deterrence is primarily about nuclear weapons and conventional weapons, right? So if we go through my 3 strategic environments, integrated deterrence is primarily about nuclear and conventional, and because the DoD cyber strategy rolls into it, it also now addresses cyber. So it addresses all 3 of the strategic environments that we talk about in the book.
Great. So in the book, you speak to exploitation being the primary form of strategic competition, and you describe exploitation as an alternate to war. For our listeners and viewers, can you tell them what you mean by exploitation as an alternate to war?
Yeah, again, a great question. It's one of the things that we really try to highlight in the book is the distinction between coercion and exploitation. In the nuclear and conventional strategic environments, the primary mechanism for states to achieve their objectives is coercion. Right? They use the threat of force or limited amounts of force to actually achieve whatever they're trying to achieve. In cyberspace, what we argue, what cyber persistence theory told us, was that states aren't using it and don't have to use cyberspace for coercive purposes. What they're using it for is for exploitative purposes. So we'll go back to my discussion of vulnerabilities. If they see there's a vulnerability in, say, a company that has valuable intellectual property, and they want that intellectual property, China, for example, who's well known for stealing vast amounts of U.S. intellectual property, as well as that of our allies and partners, they merely need to engage in a cyber campaign that exploits the vulnerability. So they get into the system, they steal the intellectual property, and they take it back through cyberspace back to China and re-innovate it. There was no coercion involved in that activity, right? Russia didn't threaten the company to get the IP. They exploited the vulnerability. And that is a huge difference between how states are gaining strategic advantage in and through cyberspace versus how they gain strategic advantage in and through the conventional space and in through the nuclear space.
Great. Thanks for clarifying that. So what I really liked in your book was that you not only proposed a new cyber theory and strategy, but you also explored some new possibilities with the interagency. Since you published the book, have you seen the IA move any closer to cyber persistence theory?
Yeah, we have. I think back on a statement that General Nakasone, who's the head of Cybercom and the director of the NSA and the Central Security Service, he made it in 2021 after SolarWinds, after Kaseya, and after the JBS exploitations by our adversaries. He said, we need to recognize that cybersecurity is national security. So it's not just a DoD issue. And I think after those three events in quick succession, we saw a significant shift in the orientations of some of our major interagency partners. So, for example, the Federal Bureau of Investigation under the Department of Justice became much more proactive. Right? They did an internal assessment and came out with a new cyber strategy that said we need to be much more proactive. And you see this through the operational posture that they've taken. They have actually, by leveraging Rule 41 of the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure, they actually reinterpreted the notion of search and seizure to, with a court order, allow them to go into computers that had malware and remove that malware. Right, so they don't give the adversary an opportunity to actually execute the malware. They inform the people who own the computer. They always try to inform them in advance. They certainly always do inform them after the fact, but they never go in unless they have a court order to go in. So that's very different, and that is consistent with this concept of initiative persistence. We've also seen CISA in DHS do a lot of wonderful things. The director of CISA, Jenny Shirley, very proactive in her orientation. They stood up the key exploited vulnerabilities database, the known exploited vulnerabilities database, which is a lot different than just being aware of vulnerabilities, which the CVE database was. What Jen said is what she wanted people to know is we ought to tell you which ones are actually being exploited, because there's no way you're going to be able to patch at the frequency that vulnerabilities are exposed. So we're going to tell you the ones that your adversaries are actually going to go after. That reduced the workload for everybody who has machines that have vulnerabilities by orders of magnitude, right? So that was a very anticipatory, data-informed policy on behalf of CISA that was, again, very consistent with the notion of initiative persistence. And one thing you didn't mention that I will is internationally. So beyond the interagency, we've done a lot of work with our partners in the United Kingdom. And, the United Kingdom stood up their National Cyber Force back in March, and they published a doctrine that is very much consistent with initiative persistence. If we look at the NATO 2022 strategic concept, they talk about things that are consistent with initiative persistence. So we think we're gaining traction, not just in the interagency, but we think we're getting it internationally as well.
Absolutely. And I think I just read sometime last week, the UK is now deploying their own hunt forward teams. So it's starting to look very similar, very similar. Mm-hmm. So for our audience, I just wanted to remind them, we would like to take some Q&A here towards the end. So if you please drop your questions into the chat box, we'd appreciate it. We have a couple of people monitoring that. So let us know what questions you'd like for us to ask Michael. So Michael, let me back this up. So in the book, you start off talking about Kuhnian revolutions. What will it take to keep pushing cyber persistence theory forward and ideally displacing the older paradigm?
A lot of work. We have, Emily and Richard and I, have been working on the theory together, we've been working on it for 6 years as a group. Richard did some early work even before then. But we've really been working with policymakers on a regular basis for the last 6 years. But we're not enough. Right. I mean, the three of us can only do so much. We took an interesting approach to try and get it out there. We wrote a lot of short essays in Lawfare, more on the rocks, because we know policymakers like to read those short essays. So we considered that was a good avenue to try to get these ideas in front of them. Every now and then we write a longer journal article, and then we eventually wrote the book. But we need venues like this, Mark, to actually expand the voice. So as I said, we are grateful for your invitation to speak about the book here. We've done a number of book launch events. We hope that people in academia, yourself included, read the book and start to push the theory. Start to pull the threads. What does this mean for X? What does this mean for Y? What does this mean for Z? I mean, we in chapter 5, we wrote a lot about what does it mean for how norms come about in cyberspace? What does it mean for interpreting international law? What does it mean for escalation dynamics? All these questions need to be re-answered because we have a new theory for state interaction in and through cyberspace, right? With nukes and conventional weapons, all those questions have been answered, but none of those questions have been answered yet in cyberspace because the foundational theory wasn't yet there. We like to think that we put out an offering that is a strong foundational theory. And so we need folks to now grab hold of it and take it for a drive and see where it comes up short, where it needs more work, see where it's solid, see what the implications of it are for other things, and so on and so forth.
So you brought up the foundational theory and how it wasn't exactly being matched in practice, especially by our adversaries. Aside from this obvious mismatch, what other motivations might have been behind your desire to write this book?
Well, yeah, and to be clear, that was the big one. I mean, we saw that we were, to be frank, we were getting our butts kicked in and through cyberspace, and we saw that our policymakers, despite their best intentions, were locked into a mindset that deterrence was the right strategy to deal with this problem. And so, we saw repeatedly in 2014, 2013, when policymakers would testify on the Hill or speak on the Hill, they would talk about the need for a cyber deterrence strategy. And what they should have been saying is the need for a cyber security strategy, because deterrence is just one strategic approach to realizing security. They were locked into this paradigm. It's now 3 generations deep in the United States, right? And you mentioned earlier that the idea of a Kuhnian paradigm shift. This is the paradigm that we had to take on, and we knew we had to take it on. And if nobody did, one of the key parts of Kuhn is you can't just tell people that what they're thinking is wrong. You have to give them the alternative, right? So we knew we had to write that alternative. So that was the second motivation for the book. We had to take what we were thinking about and talking about amongst ourselves and really write it up in a digestible way so that policymakers had the alternative, so that they could then start that shift from the paradigm of deterrence theory into the paradigm of initiative persistence and cyber persistence theory.
Thank you. So let me take a question from our audience. Scott Tousley writes, what are your thoughts on the growing question of information dominance, now driven by generative AI tools and innovation? Will this end up a fourth area of strategic contest?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it already is an area of strategic contest, and not necessarily only in and through cyberspace. If we look at the Russia-Ukraine war, we saw the United States do something very different than it had ever done before. It took intelligence and declassified it so that it could share it with our allies and with us, frankly, right, with the news media, because they took they actually seized the initiative. They showed initiative persistence in the information space by saying, we're going to grab hold of the narrative here, Russia. We're not going to give you the chance to do what you did in Georgia in 2008 and what you did in Crimea in 2014, where the Russians were very successful in managing the information control and information narrative. So the United States actually jumped ahead and got ahead of them. And President Zelensky is also doing amazing work in the information space, right? They made strategic decisions on the day of the invasion and 2 days after that had a significant impact on their ability to continue to communicate in and through cyberspace and through the wireless telecommunication space. Those were strategic choices that have enabled Ukraine to stay relevant in the minds of international leaders, right? Which has had the direct consequence of them getting the assistance that they needed, both military and humanitarian.
Sure. So speaking, you brought up the word shift here, and it got me thinking. As we shift our national cyber strategy towards cyber persistence, do we need to be concerned about how other states perceive our shift? We've been standing around getting punched in the face for the past 20 years. This new posture that we're going to embrace, should we care about how China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran view our change in behavior?
Well, we probably care less about them than we do about our allies and partners. And I know that we certainly do care about our allies and partners. And so, it is incumbent upon our policymakers, more so than it is upon, I think, myself and Richard and Emily, to explain to our allies and partners what this means. What does our operationalization of this is persistent engagement. What does it mean? What does persistent engagement mean? I suspect there are a number of leaders who still don't really have a strong grasp of it. What are hunt forward operations, which is one of the manifestations of persistent engagement? I suspect, again, that a lot of our allies and partners leaders don't quite have a grasp of it. So I think we need to do a really consistent and impressive information effort to get the word out on here's what we're talking about, and also here's why we think it's necessary, right? So we're not just doing this because we think it's a good idea. We're doing it because we think there are empirical reasons and now theoretical reasons suggesting that this is the right path forward.
Sure. So, Michael, we have about 2 minutes left. I wanted to ask you, what do you see as the future for cyber persistence theory?
Well, we're writing a second book, so that'll be part of the future. In cyber persistence theory, in the first book, we really focused on the geopolitical condition of competition, because that is where states have recognized they can gain strategic advantage in and through cyberspace through this exploitative campaigning. But policymakers don't just live in the competition space, as we were reminded in February 2 years ago. There are still militarized crises and there are still armed conflicts. And so we have now, as our next charge, taken up the responsibility of considering what are the implications for cyber persistence theory in militarized crises, and what are the implications in armed conflict. So I know that that's where we're going to take it. But I hope that there are a bunch of PhD students or master students that are going to take it in other directions. And I don't know what those are, but I'm excited to see what those would be. And so I can't offer a forecast on what that part of the future looks like. Yeah, I can tell you that we are working on book number 2 right now.
That's great. And hopefully we can have you back to discuss book number 2, because I'm sure it'll be great as book number 1.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's going to be a couple of years from now.
We'll be waiting. So we'd like to extend our thanks to Michael Fischer-Keller for sharing these invaluable insights, and to all the viewers who joined today's inaugural webinar. Your participation is greatly appreciated. So stay tuned for our upcoming Spring Digital Dialogues webinar, where we'll continue to explore valuable insights that matter to our cyber strategy community. And for Cybersecurity Month, please remember, employing cybersecurity best practices is vital to safeguarding our digital environments to stay one step ahead of evolving and persistent threats. Thank you for joining us today, and let's continue to make cyberspace more secure for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you.